all of us, consciously or unconsciously, have rhythms that govern our behavior, our interactions with others. Now, these rhythms are often shaped by, social norms, social conventions, cultural values, personal beliefs. And these things are inherited, but also adopted. They're developed, they evolve, they're observed. There's rhythms that are part of our lives. So when for the last 7 weeks we've been discussing, teaching, and hopefully cultivating rhythms that are healthy, it could feel actually very helpful to purposefully to name things, to see things, to say, oh, right, I do this. I have a rule. I have a way of existing in this world. And just even note that and be reminded of that. Sometimes it's helpful to say, is this actually good, what I'm doing? Is this actually healthy for me and my family? Is this actually a good way to live? Is this a good way to understand God and who I am in this world? And so in a lot of ways, naming these things, teaching these things, cultivating these things has been good. Because we begin to understand who we are and who God is. But can I be just honest? Because I think and I feel that also when we name these things, sometimes it could feel frustrating and debilitating, right? It can feel like, wow, I didn't know this, or how did I not know this, or I'm failing at this, or I can't just shift my life into a new direction. It's too hard. I have too many things going on. And it kind of actually could feel really painful and hard to even consider the rhythms. And as I've been reflecting on my own rhythms, what I recognized in this last week, reflecting on this and praying and thinking about it, is how I had let some rhythms that are good and healthy that I've been developing in my life slip. That actually some rhythms in my life have been neglected. That I actually wasn't doing the things that I've been cultivating for so long. And as I'm preaching on this stuff, as I'm in this world, you think I would be the most strongest participant in these rhythms. But in fact, I wasn't. I didn't feel congruent in my life or my faith. Isn't that interesting? As I've been reading about these rhythms and speaking on them, I found myself slipping. And the reality of this began to settle in, and the more I reflected, the more my family spoke into it, the more frustrated I began to feel inside. And it's like frustration and anger began to bubble in me. Like, I should know better. How could I have failed on this? What am I doing? I shouldn't fail on this. What's happening here? And in my frustration, I did what all normal people do. I took out my phone and I began to scroll aimlessly. Right? After all, our brains prefer lazy tasks. Maybe just mine, but it really does prefer the lazy task. And I began just to scroll it. And I wasn't looking for anything specific, just anything, the world of sports, social media, news, just anything to distract me from this frustration and hurt and bitterness that I was feeling, that I was failing in the thing I've been teaching about. And I really try to wrestle with it. I try to convince myself that, I'll just put it on my mind. I'll try to convince myself this isn't a good time. It'll actually make me more upset because I'll see how much I failed in doing it properly. I'll feel more guilty. And I began to negotiate. Maybe I'll just start tomorrow. I'll just fresh start tomorrow. This will be it's like working out. This is a fresh start. Today will be a write-off. Why do something when I'm failing already anyways? But the muscle memory, that pang that just wouldn't go away, and eventually I was fine, I'll read, right? Cynically, I'll do it, God, I'll read the Bible. So I closed my news app, clicked the Bible YouVersion app, and I encountered this passage. All praise to the God and Father of our Master, Jesus the Messiah, Father of all mercy, God of all healing and counsel. He comes alongside us when we go through hard times. And before you know it, he brings us alongside someone else who's going through hard times so that we can be there for that person just as God was there for us. We have plenty of hard times that come from following Jesus, the Messiah, but no more so than the good times of his healing comfort. We get a full measure of that too. God of healing comfort. My morning that began restless and frustrated began to slowly untwist. All the previous day and morning, I was living and burrowing inward in my mind and in my soul, frustrated, going deeper inward in myself, in my frustration of failure. And yet, the healthy rhythm that I have been working and cultivating all these years pulled me back, nudged at me. Unwillingly and cynically, I went to it. Like a muscle responding to an exercise, it panged and pulled, feeling the need to be fed. And where in the moment of frustration I was confronted with a pull of this exercise rhythm, encountering the comfort of God. It dawned on me that it is not the fact that I failed, it is not the fact that I failed or slipped on the rhythm that mattered, as much as how I responded to the failure. It was my shame in failure that made me pull away. It was my shame that was pulling me away from God. And yet, in all of that, God was drawing near. Justin Earley, he's an author of a book called Common Practice. He's a lawyer, was a missionary. Put it this way, when he experienced failure in his own spiritual disciplines, he said, I realized that failure is not the enemy of formation. It is the liturgy of formation. How we deal with failure says volumes about who we really believe we are, who we really believe God is. When we trip on failure, do we fall into ourselves or do we fall into grace? Justin goes on to say that failure is actually the path of our rhythms. We will fail, but it's the path, and beauty of God is the destination. You see, these rhythms that we've been talking about for all these weeks are not the destination in themselves. They're just a tool. They're just a structure to help us to develop emotionally healthy spirituality, to embrace being deeply formed in our life and God, to help us become holistic and congruent in all of our dimensions. They help us realize that God is near. Failure was an incredible and important reminder, understanding the rhythms we develop are not about some moral performance, but are simply about the beauty of becoming holistic people who God has created us to be, His image bearers. These rhythms are done for the vision of beauty. If the goal is self-help, failure will destroy you. Yet in pursuit of beauty, failure actually illuminates the goal with even greater brilliance. My prayer for us then, as we as a community build rhythms, as we cultivate them, that we remind us that failure, uncertainty, storms of life are part of the full spectrum of experience of life that help us cultivate the capacity for the full presence of God. They help us grow deep roots and allow us to be deeply formed. And as we are deeply formed, our imagination widens, and we see God's work everywhere around us, in others. We begin to see and love God and our neighbors. He comes alongside us when we go through hard times. And before you know it, He brings us alongside someone else who's going through hard times so that we can be there for that person, just as God was there for us. Friends, we embrace the beauty of the infinite God.